Hi everyone and welcome to Behind Dark Minds, a true crime channel. Here we look at the facts, analyzing the perpetrator's background, trying to figure out what led them to commit horrific acts, and in some cases, if they really did it. I'm Nina Clarke, and in today's episode we are going to analyze the case of Darlie Routier, accused of killing her two sons and dancing on their graves. Some people say she did it, some people say she didn't do it. So let's analyze the evidence and figure it out. On the night of June 6, 1996, Darlie and her sons, Devin and Damon, had fallen asleep on the ground floor of the family's home in Rowlett, a suburb east of Dallas, while watching TV. Her husband Darren was sleeping upstairs with their 8-month-old son Drake. Darlie, then 26, told the following story. She was awakened at 2:30 a.m. by Damon's cries of "Mommy, Mommy," and saw a man hovering over her with a knife. In the dark, she didn't even notice she was hurt. She saw the man moving through the kitchen and followed him as he went toward the garage. When she got to the utility room, she saw a knife and picked it up. Only then, she said, did she return to find Devin and Damon and realize that she and her boys had been stabbed. Darlie's husband Darren, who was sleeping, came downstairs after hearing his wife's screams and began administering CPR to Devin. By then, the assailant had disappeared. At 2:31 a.m., Darlie made a frantic call to 911. We're going to play and break it down the call in a bit. 5 minutes later, police arrived at Darlie's home. Darlie's eldest son, Devin, had already died from 4 stab wounds. He was just 3 days away from his 7th birthday. His brother, 5-year-old Damon, had been stabbed 4 times and had 2 slice wounds and was still alive, but later died in the care of a paramedic. Routier also suffered grievous injuries that night, including a badly bruised and cut arm and a deep gash in her neck. Darlie's necklace was so deeply pressed into her throat that it had to be surgically removed, but it ultimately stopped the knife less than 2 millimeters away from her carotid artery, an injury that could have killed her within minutes. She was immediately transported to a local hospital for emergency surgery and survived. She said she fought an intruder, and after he allegedly fled through a cut screen in the home's utility room, she and Darren took steps to quell the bleeding of their 2 children and called 911. Darlie Routier described the intruder as a man with long hair, wearing a baseball hat, a dark t-shirt, and jeans. After less than 2 weeks, Darlie Routier was charged and arrested with her son's murders. In the police telling, she had staged a break-in, murdered her sons, cut her own throat, all to collect on the boys' $5,000 insurance policies. The case went to trial within 7 months, with the jury finding her guilty, and she was sentenced to death. Until this day, she claims her innocence.
Do you have any comments? Is there anything you would like to say? I didn't murder my children.
So let's go through the evidence and see what we think. Let's go through the evidence presented by the state. Inconsistent statements from Darlie. According to prosecutors, Darlie Routier gave inconsistent versions of events surrounding the murders of her sons, Devin and Damon. These inconsistencies were central to the prosecution's argument that her story evolved to fit evidence rather than reflecting the truth. Let's talk about the different versions. The initial story to police and emergency responders. Routier initially told police that an unknown intruder broke into her home, stabbed her sons, and attacked her before fleeing the scene. She described waking up to see a man fleeing the scene, who she said dropped a knife as he escaped. She chased him briefly, picking up the knife and returning to call 911. Only then did she realize she and her 2 boys were injured. the unconsciousness version. At some point, Routier suggested that she might have been knocked unconscious or disoriented during the attack, which could explain gaps in her memory. She claimed she could not fully recall the sequence of events and hypothesized that her memory might be incomplete due to trauma. The two assailants theory. Later, Routier introduced the idea that there might have been two intruders instead of one. This was likely an attempt to explain why did the attack seem disproportionately severe toward the children while her injuries were superficial, and why she might have been unable to react in time to protect her children. I don't know about you, but to me it doesn't seem like different versions. It rather seems like speculations to questions brought up by the police, which is normal human behavior. Let me know in the comments what you think. The 911 call. Prosecutors claim that Darlie's behavior during the 911 call was inconsistent with what they believed a grieving mother would act like. The prosecution argued that she sounded too calm and composed, suggesting that she might have been trying to fake distress or guilt, and that she failed to demonstrate a sense of urgency in the recording. She did not appear to be frantic or panicked, despite the severity of the situation, which they argue was indicative of her guilt. They also pointed out, when talking about the knife during the call, she mentioned fingerprints, and that she wouldn't have thought of that if she was worried about her kids. I don't have kids, so I don't know if having them would make me forget, but I would definitely have thought about prints if I just had touched the knife some psycho used to attack me. Let's hear the call together and break it down.
911, what is your emergency? Ma'am? What? Who did? Hang on. Hang on, ma'am. I'm on medical emergency, 681 Eagle Drive. Ma'am, I'm trying to get an ambulance to you. Hang on a minute. My baby's forgot. What's going on, ma'am? Oh, my God. I need to go to 901 and on medical emergency, 580 Eagle Drive by 238. Celtic Linda Vista and Willowbrook. Attention 901 medical emergency. Maybe after stabbing, 5801 Eagle Drive by 238. Celtic Linda Vista and Willowbrook.
I don't know what you think, so let me know in the comments. But to me, she sounds desperate and it sounds genuine. It sounds like she's in shock.
Oh my God! Unit 44601 Eagle Drive, 5801 Eagle Drive. The circle people on the phone. Hold on. The child has been stabbed. Ma'am, I need you to calm down and talk to me. What? 5801 Eagle. Ma'am, listen to me. I need you to. Oh my God! Can you take the radio clip? Yes. Ma'am, I need you to talk to me. Ma'am, I can't understand you. You're going to have to slow down, calm down, and talk to me. What is going on? Somebody's keeping them all sleeping. Me and my little boys are sleeping downstairs.
So here she says she woke up, she was fighting. And this is important because a lot of people say that she wouldn't have slept through it. But if she was in shock and if she came to herself and she was fighting, this completely makes sense. It could have happened.
Ma'am,
first time she mentions that she is feeling really bad, that she's dying because she had a cut on her throat. And to this point, she haven't had mentioned her wounds and how she was feeling. She was desperate because of the kids. This is, to me, indicative that she was concerned about them. She wanted to get them help.
5801 Eagle Drive, 5801 Eagle Drive, gonna be a stabbing. When are they gonna be here? Ma'am, they're on their way. Oh my God. Ma'am, how old are your boys? What? How old are your boys? No. Okay. Oh my God. Oh my God. Calm down, can you? Your name, Darlie? Should I put that down? Yes, please. God, they're taking forever. There's nobody in your head.
And she keeps like telling them when they are going to be here, when they are coming. She wants them to come fast, so she wants them to be able to save the kids. She's like desperate, saying like, where are they?
You don't know who this is?
Here, someone reminds her, don't touch anything. And Darlie goes, oh, I already touched it. I pick it up. So here she realizes that she did something wrong, that she touched a piece of evidence, and that's important because later on she's gonna talk about prints, and like the prosecution and the police said that that was not a normal behavior to like worry about fingerprints when their kids are dying, but someone reminded her, don't touch anything. Her worrying about the prints is not indicative that she wasn't worried about her kids. It was like, I also want to catch the person that did this. And the 911 dispatcher reminded her that she touched something that she shouldn't have.
Okay, ma'am, listen. There's a police officer at your front door. Is your front door unlocked? Yes, ma'am. Okay. They're breathing. They don't get in here. They're just sad. My God, they're sad. Okay, is 82 out on Eagle? Huh? That Eagle? What Eagle? My God, I'm sorry. 82, you out. Oh my God. Oh my God. Why would they do this? What do you say? Why would they do this? Okay, listen, ma'am. You need to let the officers in the front door, okay? What? Ma'am? You need to let the police officers in the front door.
So here she's talking with the police officer that just came into the house. She's like, look, the knife was laying over there. I already picked it up. And then she comments, you're gonna see, she's gonna comment about the prints.
Okay, it's all right. It's okay. We got the prints, baby. Ma'am, hang on a second. We walked in here and did it, Dan. Okay, ma'am. Ma'am, is the police officer there? Okay, go talk to him, okay? Yes, that's okay. Go talk to him, though. Okay?
So yeah, this is like huge. This 911 call is like, to me, it's genuine. I think she's really desperate, and I think she's really trying to get emergency responders there quickly to try to save her sons. I think she's really shocked that her sons are dead. She keeps like repeating, oh my god, they're dead. And it's like she's shocked, and she keeps like asking, who would do this? Who would do something like this? She's as shocked as someone who would like live a situation like this would be. I don't think this is the call of someone that's guilty of murdering their kids. Furthermore, she had her throat cut, and she's there like trying to get help for her kids. She mentions like further in the call only one time that she feels bad, that she feels like she's dying. All the time she's like asking for the emergency responders to get there to help her kids. She doesn't even care that she's hurt. And I think this is really telling. I mean, this is my opinion. I think she's being genuine. So let's continue. Staging of the crime scene. On the scene that night was a veteran but retired Rowlett police officer, James Crown, who after only 25 to 30 minutes was convinced there was no intruder and that the murders were an inside job.
I noticed the blood, or lack of blood in some cases. There was a lack of evidence connecting a suspect to this. All we had was a scene and victims, and therefore one of the victims became the suspect. We didn't start looking at the mother till 20, 30 minutes in when I told him, I said, something's wrong with this scene.
He concluded that Darlie Routier had staged the scene, including her injuries. No signs of forced entry. The prosecution argued that there were no signs of forced entry into the home, which pointed out that Darlie had fabricated the story about seeing an intruder. The alleged entry and exit point of the killer was an open window in the garage that had its screen slashed. But they argue there was an undisturbed layer of dust on the windowsill, suggesting that no one came through it.
As you can see, there's no mulch underneath the window. The mulch is at least 6 to 7 feet over in this direction. And this is the windowsill that they said that was not disturbed. And as you can see, you can walk right through this window without disturbing any of the windowsill.
Okay, I guess it's worse now. I'm making it worse. Turn like this. Yeah, okay. A bread knife from the Routier's kitchen was determined to have been used to slit the window screen in the garage. Microscopic fiberglass particles consistent with the window screen were found on this knife.
The bread knife had been dusted for fingerprints with a brush that raised questions for Cooper.
My experts tested 7 random fingerprint brushes, and 4 of them had the same chemical consistency and appearance as this one fiber that was found on the bread knife.
Another issue is the credibility of the state's crime scene analyst, Charles Lynch, who told the court that fibers from the cut window screen were found on a kitchen knife.
We've since learned that this state's witness, expert, has been wholly incorrect in one or more other cases in his evaluation of evidence. He was suffering from severe depression, alcoholism apparently, that was so bad that his own employers showed up and forcibly put him in a detox ward.
Detectives also found a long bleached blonde hair in the cut screen. At the time of the attack, Darlie Routier had long bleached blonde hair, strengthening their theory that Darlie staged the crime scene. But DNA later proved that the hair belonged to a police officer who contaminated the crime scene. The dog's behavior. The Routier's dog, a small Pomeranian, reportedly did not bark or alert the family to an intruder. The prosecution argued that this was inconsistent with the presence of a stranger in the home. Lack of motive for a target at a break-in. The Routier home was in a relatively affluent neighborhood, but the family was not notably wealthy or high profile. The intruder would have had no clear motive to specifically target that family. The neighborhood was considered safe, with low crime rates and few reports of burglaries or violent incidents. This made it unlikely for an intruder to choose this location as a site for a random or opportunistic crime. Nothing of significant value was taken from the home. Darlie's jewelry, which was in plain view of the kitchen counter, was untouched. Other expensive items in the house were not disturbed. The prosecution argued that a typical burglar would not leave without taking anything of value, especially when items were easily accessible. The alleged intruder supposedly bypassed other homes in the area to enter through a garage window at the Routier's residence. The intruder would have risked exposure as the crime occurred early in the morning when it was becoming light outside. Prosecution argued that a logical burglar or attacker would have chosen a more secluded or less risky target. Disorganization of the crime scene. The house was not ransacked, which the prosecution argued would be expected if a burglar had committed the crime. The lack of chaos in the house suggested to them that the killings might have been a planned act, as opposed to a random attack by an intruder. The vacuum cleaner in the living room was knocked over with the cord stretched out, and a wine glass was broken on the kitchen floor, with shards scattered. The prosecution argued this was staged to create the appearance of a struggle. A sock with both boys' blood was found 75 yards from the house. Prosecutors suggested it was planted by Darlie to make it appear as though an intruder fled the scene. The knife used in the attack was part of a set stored in a block in the Routier's kitchen. No other weapon was found at the scene, supporting the argument that the killer used a knife from the home. Blood evidence. Virtually all of the blood on Darlie's shirt was her own, but there was one tiny blood stain on the back that contained both Devin's and Damon's blood that the prosecution argued was consistent with her standing over her children and stabbing them. Blood evidence in the kitchen sink and counter area led the prosecution to suggest that Darlie attempted to clean the knife, wash her hands, or cut her own throat over the kitchen sink. But Darlie stated she went to the sink to wet towels to help her children, which explains her washed blood in the sink. In addition, a bloody fingerprint found on a coffee table in the living room was identified as belonging to her. An unidentified bloody fingerprint was also found on the door leading to the garage, and a partial fingerprint was discovered on the coffee table that were never definitely matched to Darlie, Daring, or the children. They dismissed those prints as significant, implying they belonged to someone from the household. Self-inflicted wounds. According to the prosecution, Darlie had superficial cuts on her neck and arms, which they argue was self-inflicted. They pointed out that it was not consistent with an intruder attack, but instead she inflicted the wounds on herself to make it appear as though she were a victim. Darlie couldn't have slept through the attack. The prosecution also argued that Darlie couldn't have slept through the attack, centered on the violence, noise, proximity of the events, and her wounds, asserting that her story was implausible. Darlie's behavior. Her behavior played a major part in her conviction, so let's go through it. When rescue workers arrived, it seemed incriminating that Routier didn't follow paramedics as they took Damon away or asked where they were taking him. In addition, doctors and nurses from the hospital where she was treated for her injuries testified that her behavior was seen as suspicious, and she did not appear to be grieving or even particularly upset about the deaths of her children.
Notes taken at Baylor Hospital described Darlie as tearful, frightened, and sobbing uncontrollably. But when the nurses testified at trial, they changed their story, saying Darlie never grieved or cried for her children. The defense says the nurses were coached before their testimony.
And the most damning evidence against Darlie Routier, in their opinion, was provided by Routier herself. She had invited local news crews to film her and her family and friends celebrating what would have been Devon's 7th birthday at the gravesite 8 days after their deaths. Darlie was on painkillers, antibiotics, and antidepressants, but joined her family in singing happy birthday. Cameras then capture Routier and company chewing gum, laughing, singing, and spraying silly string over their graves.
Happy birthday, dear Devin. Happy birthday to you.
Love you, Devin and Damon.
And what made me start to cry today was I started remembering, because I would always usually put them to bed at night, and I would tuck them.
Who is that?
Go boy. Bubba.
Is that Bubba's?
Bubba.
Carter.
It's Bubba's
Usually
birthday.
he'll see this picture because we keep it up, and he'll start hitting it, and making noises and smiling.
Here, I'll hold it.
Yeah, he'll hold.
And he would take the liquid paper and he was painting on his cards. Just change them up from what they were before.
If you knew Devin and Damon, you would know that they're up in heaven, and they're up there having the biggest birthday party that we could ever imagine. All I was thinking about was trying to save the babies. I mean, Darren and I tried to save the babies, but it was too late and the babies were gone. But we tried, and we have to live with that forever.
Now we know that this is a sick individual that took absolutely nothing from our house, but took the two most important things that were important to us.
Earlier that same day, the family held a solemn memorial service at the gravesite, where Darlie had openly wept and expressed grief. The Roulette police secretly and illegally filmed the gravesite gathering without the family's knowledge. However, this portion of the day was not talked about or shown to the jury.
Prior to that birthday party celebration, there was a 2-hour memorial service.
We have many things to pray to God about. We love children so much.
The preacher was there, the family was there, prayers, crying, the emotion you would expect, all appropriate behavior. Her sister brought the silly string. It wasn't Darlie's idea.
Then, later on, she and Darlie returned to the cemetery.
Are we allowed to do this?
After viewing the silly string tape on the news, State Prosecutor Greg Davis believed Darlie's behavior was not consistent with that of a grieving mother.
I remember the first time I saw that, I was at home watching the news. And I just, as a parent, I'm sitting there trying to conceive of this, how any parent in that position could possibly be doing something like that. It disgusted me. It troubled me. I do remember when that was played in the courtroom. And I remember the reaction of the jurors, and their reactions, I think, were the same as when I had seen it for the first time. Disbelief. How can a mother who's lost 2 children be out there laughing, cutting up, joking, and playing around at a gravesite when she's just lost 2 of her children?
Within days, she was charged with Damon's death. They chose to charge her with only Damon's death for 2 reasons. One was that he was under 6 years old, which automatically qualifies for the death penalty in Texas. The second one was if the jury found her not guilty on the first trial, they could trial her again for Devon's death. In the police telling, she had staged a break-in, murdered her sons, and slit her own throat, all to collect on the boys' $5,000 insurance policies. The case went to trial within 7 months, arguably not enough time for a death penalty case. The prosecution opened their case by offering the state's theory of the crime. According to the state, Darlie Routier was a selfish woman whose extravagant lifestyle was being threatened by the responsibilities of motherhood. The prosecution insinuated that if her 2 sons were dead, Darlie could collect on their life insurance and resume her wild ways. The district attorney argued that Darlie, suffering from postpartum depression, slit her own throat and then tried to make it appear that an intruder had committed the crime. The prosecution presented the evidence that we talked about, much of which was circumstantial, but still seemed to paint a damning picture to the jury. They also brought a friend of Darlie, who stated Routier had a temper and had become materialistic over the years as her husband's computer business allowed the couple to live in an expensive home and purchase a boat and a Jaguar. During the trial, the prosecution relied heavily on the video from the gravesite birthday ceremony.
That was a celebration of Devin's birthday. We had everything ready to have his birthday. We had invitations sent out. We had the presents already bought. And he was murdered 3 days before we got to have his party.
That whole scenario, we're not sorry for. We would do it again. The reason why it was done is out of honor for them and honor for Devin.
That birthday party was done out of complete love, unselfish love, nothing but pure love done for him because he wanted to be 7.
We decided that the kids could, from the neighborhood that were invited to Devin's birthday, could come up and that they could bring their gifts to Devin there. And I remember telling Darlene not to scare the kids, you know, because we were so hysterical at times that with little children around, you wouldn't want to be screaming and hollering and bawling and crying because you'd be terrifying those kids, you know.
They claimed she was a shallow, materialistic woman with no remorse. They said she wanted her sons gone because they were too much responsibility and got in the way of her desired lifestyle. The defense attacked the theory that she committed the murders to collect on her boy's life insurance policy, which totaled $10,000, not enough to cover their funeral expenses. And according to Darlie's attorney, if money was the motive, why wouldn't she kill her husband, who was insured for $800,000? Medical testimony established that Damon could not have lived for more than 9 minutes after his fatal stab wound, and that he did not die until paramedics arrived. So before they arrived, the following events must have happened. Darlie talked to a 911 operator for 5 minutes and 40 seconds of those 9 minutes. The police secured the crime scene for an additional 2 of the 9 minutes before paramedics were let in. That leaves Darlie Routier approximately a minute and a half to place the sock 75 yards down the street, stage the entire crime scene, cause her injuries, and then cut her own throat. They introduced medical records showing that the knife slash to Darlie's neck came within 2 millimeters of severing her carotid artery. A wound this severe would have instantly killed her. They also brought up the unidentified fingerprints at the crime scene that were believed to belong to the intruder. A bloody fingerprint on the door leading to the garage and a second print on the credenza behind the couch have never been positively identified by investigators. They also believed the attacker may have been a sexual predator or a serial killer. There were many in the area at the time. Let me give you some examples. Tommy Lynn Sells, a serial killer active between 1979 and 1999, is believed to have committed at least 22 murders, with Sells himself claiming over 70 victims. His reported victims ranged from 10 years old to 39 years old.
Two words I don't like to use is love and sorry, because I'm about hate.
His methods for killing were as random as the people he targeted. He raped many before cutting their throats or beating them, stabbing others and strangling some.
Vicious cycle.
One of his victims, 10-year-old Joe Kirkpatrick, was stabbed 12 times as he slept in his bed. His mother was arrested and convicted with his murder, and eventually was granted a certificate of innocence in 2010, after Sells confessed to the murder in 2004. Raul Meza Jr., who was convicted of killing an 8-year-old girl in the 1980s and was released early from prison in 1993 for good behavior, was charged with 2 other killings that happened in 2019 and 2023. Austin police said at the time they were also looking at as many as 10 cold cases going back to 1996 that could be connected to him.
A convicted child killer released from prison after just 11 years is back behind bars after cops say he confessed to being a serial killer.
Sammy Lucas Cook Jr., who was linked by DNA evidence in the early 2000s to as many as 15 rapes dating to 1995 in the Dallas area. Cook's victims reported that their assailant had worn a bandana over his face and either gloves or socks on his hands to prevent leaving any fingerprints. In one case, a woman told of coming out of her bathroom to find a man holding a kitchen fork to the throat of her 6-year-old daughter. The mother managed to grab her daughter, but was eventually raped. And that's just to name a few. The defense countered the fact that Darlie couldn't have slept through the attack by suggesting that trauma, shock, and the unpredictability of human behavior in emergencies could account for her delayed awareness or memory lapse. They also challenged the blood spatter analysis, arguing that was based in flawed science and that the patterns of blood could have been caused by other factors, such as the movement of the bodies and the application of CPR. They argued that the glass on top of blood could have been accidentally knocked over after the attack, as Darlie moved around the kitchen in a state of panic and shock, or contamination of the crime scene by police and paramedics, whose first priority was to attend to the victims and not preserve the crime scene. They also suggested that the hair and fiber evidence was unreliable and that the bloody fingerprint belonging to Darlie could have been left there in a different time or when she moved through the scene. They questioned lead detective Jeannie Patterson and accused him of withholding key evidence, specifically handwritten notes taken during the investigation, which had not been included in the case file. Also notes from the nurses and doctors that contradicted their testimony that Darlie wasn't grieving the death of her children. In the recording of the gravesite that showed Darlie sobbing and grieving before the silly string incident, Detective Patterson invoked his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination and did not answer the questions. Finally, the defense argued that Darlie's behavior after the attack was not evidence of guilt, but rather a normal response to a traumatic event. They pointed out that people can react differently to tragedy, and that grief can manifest in different ways. During deliberations, the jury watched the happy birthday video 8 times. It took them 10 hours to reach a guilty verdict for the murder of her young son Damon. After hearing the verdict, Darlie reportedly cried out, "I did not kill my babies."
What was it that persuaded you the most?
There isn't one thing or another thing. I mean, that videotape is pretty devastating, and yes, we watched it a lot. And she didn't cry. She smiled, and she snapped her gum, and she laughed,
And she was on a lot of medication.
I don't care what medication.
Bonkers. 2 days later, on February 3, 1997, the jury recommended that Routier be put to death. And since that time, she has remained on death row in a state where the death penalty is often carried to conclusion for both men and women. For the past 29 years, Routier has maintained her innocence. Despite the conviction and death sentence, the Darlie Routier case has been the subject of much debate and controversy over the years. Many people believe that she was wrongly convicted and that there is not enough evidence to support the prosecution's case. One of the biggest controversies surrounding the case is the fairness of the trial. Critics argue that the prosecution was biased against her and that her defense team was not provided with adequate resources to mount a proper case. They suggested that the trial was rushed and that important evidence was ignored or mishandled. Darlie Routier, although divorced from Darlie, still supports her claim of innocence. They got divorced in June 2011, 14 years after Darlie's arrest, and he said the decision was mutual and very difficult, and was made to end the limbo that they had been in since her arrest and conviction. He also reported that Drake, the 8-month-old in the upstairs bedroom that night, is now an adult who was treated for leukemia and is now in remission, and that Drake still visits his mother in prison and continues to believe in her innocence. Darlie Routier has filed 2 appeals of her conviction, both of which were denied. Routier has maintained her innocence and claims that irregularities occurred during her trial. As of 2025, the results of DNA tests ordered after technology has advanced are still pending. She and her mother, Darlie Key, have proclaimed Routier's innocence through newspapers, books, and several TV documentaries. Aided by a team of lawyers at her side, the mother-daughter pair have challenged the verdict in both the state and federal courts. Appeal attorney Stephen Cooper was assigned to the case and made a shocking discovery. Court reporter Sandra Hawsey had made more than 30,000 mistakes in the trial transcript. 40 to 50% of those were substantial. Without a reliable transcript, Cooper couldn't stage a proper appeal. He felt that substantial errors would earn Routier a new day in court, yet her motion for a new trial was denied. Instead, the state offered her life in prison if she dropped her appeal and admitted to her children's murder. Routier refused.
The original transcript had over 33,000 mistakes in it by a court reporter who took the Fifth Amendment when we tried to question her about her preparation of this record.
In court reporter Sandra Halsey's transcript, 53 pages were missing. Wrong words were used and non-verbal responses omitted, and some of the errors changed the essential facts of the case. This was only discovered when a new court reporter began reconstructing the transcripts from audio tapes that were recorded in court as backup.
Diametrically different words, like the difference between yes and no, and the difference between can and cannot, and the difference between would and wouldn't.
According to the defense lawyers in their federal filing, Routier did not have a proper legal representation, and the defense did not counter scientific evidence that allegedly linked Routier to the crime due to her lawyer's conflict of interest. In the beginning, Routier was represented by attorneys Douglas Parks and Wayne Huff, who retained 2 forensic scientists and who were prepared to counter prosecution's theories about how the blood spatter, broken wine wine glasses, a bread knife found at the scene, and an overturned vacuum cleaner refuted Routier's story that an intruder had murdered the children and attacked her. The forensic scientists Terry Labor and Barton Epstein disagree that the blood on the back of Routier's nightgown came from the knife spatter as she allegedly raised and lowered her arm while stabbing the children. However, the two court-appointed lawyers were eventually replaced by attorney Douglas Mulder and several others, who, according to the federal appeal, did not use forensic scientists to counter the scientific evidence presented by the prosecution. Mulder also agreed not to attempt to implicate Darren as a suspect in the murders of the two children. The present defense team pointed out that Mulder had represented Darren in the past and thus was conflicted in his representation of Darlie. In addition, the prosecution used character assassination to turn the jury against Routier. The prosecutor's opening statement said, and I quote, "The real Darlie Routier is in fact a self-centered woman, a materialistic woman, and a woman cold enough, in fact, to murder her own two children." The prosecution presented the jury with the video of Darlie shooting silly string and laughing during a graveside celebration of Devon's 7th birthday. What the jury never found out was that her sister organized the graveside party and brought the silly string, and that there was a 2-hour memorial prayer service followed by a quiet family gathering that took place before the silly string incident. A doctor and 2 nurses who treated Routier while in the Baylor hospital were allowed to testify that Routier did not act typically for a woman who had just lost 2 children.
One of the things was when I saw the focus notes that these nurses keep.
What did the notes say?
Well, I brought some here to read to you.
Because that was very damaging. They said she didn't want to hold baby Drake.
Exactly. This is from the focus notes of a nurse that took care of Darlie. Patient, crying, visibly upset, very emotional, periods of angry sobbing. Then the nurse noted at 1200, when they were concluding their shift, patient continues to weep, which meant Darlie literally cried throughout the whole entire 7-hour shift. When it came to the testimony, this is the exact testimony. The state asked, when she was in your care, did you notice that she seemed upset to you? Answer, she was. Her eyes were tearful, but she had a very flat effect. Didn't seem to have a lot of emotion.
Her appeal lawyer stated, this impermissible character evidence and expert testimony from the medical personnel is so infected Ms. Routier's trial as to undermine the confidence in the verdict. Also unseen was photos of Routier's extensive wounds and bruises, which in her attorney's eyes cast doubt on whether her injuries could have been self-inflicted. Darlie's family and attorneys claimed that during the investigation and trial, crucial details were overlooked. They say that the photos of her wounds were not properly presented to the jury. After the trial, one of the jurors who convicted Darlie, Charlie Sanford, had a chance to take a close look at the pictures and said, and I quote, "After I saw the pictures, it made me feel that she's not guilty. She did not cut herself, and she put up a heck of a fight to protect her own self. I believe with all my heart that Darlie Lynn Routier is innocent. There's not a doubt in my mind."
Precious Angels by crime writer Barbara Davis is a scathing indictment of Darlie Routier. Anyone who reads it will be convinced of her guilt.
When I came back to write the book, I wanted it to be so certain that nobody'd lose any sleep over this happening. I was that convinced when I left the trial. The main thing that changed my mind is when I first saw the pictures that I didn't get to see at the trial.
The photos are of Darlie with horrendous bruises all over her arms and hands. Charlie Semford, who sat on the jury, says he never saw these photos either.
These three I didn't see. If I had seen these during the trial, she, as far as I'm concerned, she'd be home with her family right now.
Author Barbara Davis is now so convinced of Darlie's innocence that she has befriended the family and gives all money made from the book to Darlie's defense fund.
Cooper also questioned why Routier's husband was not investigated more thoroughly. In a signed affidavit, he admitted to one insurance scam as well as a plot for a staged home robbery so he could collect a claim. Darlie Routier would have collected on his wife's life insurance had she died of her injuries. The defense, in its quest to overturn Routier's verdict, summed up its case in its federal petition, stating that the jury that convicted Darlie for Damon's murder never heard substantial evidence that undermines the state's circumstantial case against her and supports her claim of innocence. The defense wants the verdict overturned because no court can have confidence in such a fundamentally tainted verdict. Over the years, Routier's challenges in the courts have moved glacially slow, awaiting the outcome of DNA tests on the blood evidence from the rugs, Routier's nightgown, on the pair of socks found 75 yards away, and several mysterious, unidentified fingerprints have been on hold for more than a decade, pending the outcome of her state post-conviction challenge. In May 2017, counsel in the Dallas District Attorney's Office learned that materials that were supposed to have been transported to the Department of Public Safety for DNA testing had never been transported to DPS. That error has since been rectified, and according to defense attorney Smith, the DNA testing is in its last stage. After closely examining the details of her case, ranging from the inconsistencies in the investigation to the questionable interpretation of evidence, it's clear that reasonable doubt remains. Darlie has spent over 3 decades on death row maintaining her innocence, a stance that deserves deeper scrutiny, especially when weighted against the possibility of a wrongful conviction. Justice should not only punish the guilty, but also protect the innocent. This case reminds us of the importance of a fair, true legal process where no stone is left unturned. Let's continue to demand truth, fairness, and compassion in the pursuit of justice. The long-anticipated decision regarding her appeals and the potential for new DNA evidence to be considered is expected in the near future. This could finally shed light on unanswered questions and perhaps pave the way for justice to be served. I believe her innocence. What are your thoughts? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you for watching, subscribe for more, and I'll see you in the next episode of Behind Dark Minds. Bye.